If you ever find a place that welcomes monsters, don't trust it, someone once whispered. Yet Elena Whitmore still lifted the latch that night, letting the storm and the stranger in. Rain hammered against the wooden beams of her tavern, each drop echoing through the hollow silence like a warning she refused to hear. The man who stepped across the threshold carried no visible weapon, no open threat, yet something in the way the air shifted around him made her breath catch. He was tall, cloaked in travel-worn black, water dripping from the edges of his coat onto the creaking floorboards. His eyes moved slowly, deliberately, taking in every corner, every shadow, every quiet soul huddled near the fire. Rogues. The unwanted. The ones no pack would claim. Elena felt their tension ripple through the room like a held breath. They expected judgment. They always did. She closed the door behind him, steady despite the tremor in her chest, and reached for a clean cloth. "You're soaked," she said softly, her voice cutting through the unease. No one else spoke. No one dared. She crossed the few feet between them, close enough to feel the cold radiating from his skin, yet there was something beneath it, something coiled and restrained, like heat buried under ice. He didn't move when she touched his sleeve to check for injuries. Didn't flinch. Just watched her. Always watching. "Food's hot," she added, turning toward the small stove where a pot simmered gently, the scent of broth filling the air with something warm, something human. She ladled a portion into a chipped bowl, her movements practiced, calm, as if she wasn't standing in a room that could get her killed if discovered. As if feeding rogues wasn't a crime punishable by exile. Or worse. The stranger followed her with his gaze, silent, calculating. She felt it like a weight between her shoulder blades. Most men looked at her and saw nothing. An omega. Forgettable. Weak. He didn't look at her that way. His eyes lingered, sharp and unreadable, as if searching for something she didn't even know she carried. A chair scraped quietly in the corner. One of the younger rogues shifted, clutching his side where a bandage peeked. Through torn fabric. Elena noticed immediately. She always did. Without hesitation, she set the bowl in front of the stranger, then turned away, kneeling beside the injured boy. "Let me see," she murmured, her hands gentle as she adjusted the cloth, her touch steady despite the faint glow of fear humming beneath her skin. The boy winced, then relaxed, his breathing slowing under her presence. It always happened like that. She didn't question it anymore. The stranger saw it. Elena knew he did. She could feel his attention sharpen, like a blade finding its edge. "You help all of them?" His voice was low, controlled, carrying a quiet authority that didn't belong in a place like this. She didn't look up. They need it. Simple. Honest. Dangerous. A faint sound echoed outside. Boots against wet ground. Too many. Too close. The room stilled. Fear crept in, slow and suffocating. Elena rose to her feet, every instinct screaming at her to hide, to run, to survive. Instead, she stepped forward, placing herself between the door and the rogues behind her. The stranger's gaze darkened. Not with anger. With something else. Interest. "You'd risk everything," he said quietly. Not a question. Elena met his eyes for the first time, something unshakable settling in her chest despite the storm, despite the danger, despite him. Some things are worth it. Silence stretched between them, thick and electric. Then, just for a second, something shifted. The air itself seemed to bend. The stranger's lips curved, almost imperceptibly, as if he'd just seen the answer to a question no one else knew to ask. And in that fleeting moment, though Elena couldn't name it, she felt it deep in her bones. She was no longer the only one making a choice tonight. He was too. The knock came again, louder this time, not from the door but from the silence pressing in around it, and Elena felt every rogue in the room hold their breath at once. The storm had not eased, yet the sound outside carried something sharper than rain, something deliberate. She did not move immediately. Instead, she listened, counting the seconds between each distant footstep, measuring the rhythm the way she had learned to do after. Too many close calls. 3, 4, 5. Too organized to be wanderers. Too quiet to be drunk travelers. Hunters. The realization settled cold in her chest, but her face did not change. It never did. Behind her, someone shifted, a chair leg scraping softly against the floor. Fear spread fast in places like this, faster than fire. Elena raised one hand without turning, A simple gesture, steady and calm. Stay? It was not a command. It was a promise. The stranger watched her, unmoving, his presence filling the small space without effort. He had not touched the food. Not yet. His attention had shifted to the door, then back to her, as if weighing two very different choices. You knew they would come, he said quietly. His tone was not accusing. It was observant. Elena exhaled slowly, forcing her pulse to slow with it. They always do. Another sound outside. Closer now. A murmur of voices, low, controlled, carried through the storm like a warning. Elena stepped toward the entrance, each movement deliberate, her boots soft against the worn wood. She could feel the rogues behind her, feel their fear rising, pressing against her back like a wave ready to break. She did not let it reach her face. Fear had no place here, not if she wanted them to survive the night. Her hand hovered near the latch, but she did not open it. Not yet. Instead, she turned slightly, just enough to catch the stranger in her peripheral vision. If you are planning to leave, she said, her voice calm, almost gentle, now would be the time. A test. A quiet one. He did not move, not even a shift of weight. For a moment, the only sound was the storm, the steady drip of water from his coat onto the floor, the soft crackle of the fire struggling to stay alive. Then he leaned back in his chair, slow, controlled, as if settling into something inevitable. I think I will stay, he replied. Something in the way he said it made the air tighten. Not defiance. Not fear. Decision. Elena gave a small nod, as if that answer had been expected, though her heartbeat betrayed her, quickening just slightly. She turned back to the door and lifted the latch. It opened only a few inches before the wind pushed against it, rain slicing through the gap. Beyond the threshold, shadowed figures stood just out of reach of the lantern light, their outlines blurred by the storm, yet unmistakable in their stillness. They were not shouting. They were not demanding. That made it worse. Evening, Elena said, her voice carrying just enough to be heard without inviting more attention. One of the figures stepped forward, stopping at the edge of the light. We are looking for travelers, he said. Polite. Controlled. Official. Elena tilted her head slightly, as if considering the words. So am I. A pause followed, stretched thin by the rain. The man's gaze flicked past her shoulder, trying to see inside, trying to measure what she was hiding. Elena did not move aside, did not give him an inch more than she had to. Behind her, silence held. No one spoke. No one breathed too loudly. It was a fragile balance, one that could break with a single wrong word. You run this place alone? The man asked. Elena let the question hang for a heartbeat before answering. Most nights. Another test. Another calculation. The stranger inside shifted slightly, just enough for her to feel it, like a ripple beneath still water. She did not look back. She could not afford to. The man outside studied her, something unreadable passing through his expression. Then, slowly, he stepped back into the storm. If you see anything unusual, he said, you will report it. Elena met his gaze, steady and unyielding. Of course. The figures faded into the rain, their presence dissolving into the night as quietly as it had come. Elena waited. Counted again. 1, 2, 3. Matters. He studied her in silence, something unreadable flickering beneath his calm exterior. Then, almost to himself, he murmured, interesting. And though Elena did not understand why, those single words felt far more dangerous than the men who had just left. The room did not return to normal after the door closed. Not completely, because something had shifted, something unseen yet impossible to ignore, and Elena felt it settle deep beneath her ribs like a quiet warning she could not name. The rogues moved again, slowly at first, voices low, careful, as if afraid the night might still be listening. But their eyes kept drifting toward the stranger, toward the man who had said so little, yet seemed to take up more space than anyone else in the room. Elena noticed everything. She always did. The way the youngest rogue lingered closer to her side now, seeking comfort without asking. The way the older ones kept their distance from the stranger, instinct guiding them even when logic failed. Wolves always knew, even when humans pretended not to. She placed another bowl on the table, then finally looked at him fully, studying him the way he had studied her. You are not from around here, she said, her tone neutral, almost casual, though nothing about this moment felt simple. He met her gaze without hesitation. No one word. Measured. Controlled. It told her nothing, yet somehow confirmed everything. Elena folded her arms lightly, not defensive, just grounded. Then you should know this place is not safe. A faint smile touched his lips, brief, almost invisible. For whom? The question lingered between them, heavier than it should have been. Elena did not answer right away. Table, his gaze never leaving her. And you? Another test. Elena felt it, sharp and deliberate. She met his eyes again, steady despite the flicker of uncertainty beneath her calm. I belong where I choose to stand. Silence followed, but it was not empty. It carried weight, tension, something unspoken building beneath the surface. The fire cracked softly behind her, a small, grounding sound in a room that suddenly felt too still. One of the rogues coughed quietly, breaking the moment just enough for Elena to step away, to move, to breathe again. She knelt beside the injured boy once more, checking the bandage. Adjust her. He studied her for a long moment, longer than before, as if memorizing something, as if trying to understand a language he had never needed to learn. Then, slowly, he reached into his coat, drawing out a small object and placing it on the table between them. It was simple, unremarkable to most. But Elena felt at the moment it touched the wood, a faint pulse of something old, something powerful, something that did not belong in a place like this. Her breath caught before she could stop it. Then tell me, he said softly, his eyes never leaving hers. Would you still do what is right, if it meant standing against a king? The question did not feel hypothetical. It felt like a line being drawn, invisible yet absolute. Elena looked at the object, then back at him, something deep within her stirring, something she had spent her whole life ignoring. When she spoke, her voice was quiet, but there was no hesitation left in it. If the king is wrong, she said, then yes. For the first time, something real flickered across his expression. Not surprise, not anger, something closer to recognition. And in that moment, though the truth had not yet been spoken, it was already there, waiting just beneath the surface, ready to change everything. The question did not fade after she answered it. It lingered in the air like something alive, pressing gently against Elena's thoughts as if waiting to see whether she would take it back. But she did not. She could not, because the truth had already left her lips, and there was no pulling it back now. The stranger did not respond right away, his gaze steady, unreadable, yet deeper than before, as if her words had unlocked something he had not expected to find. Around them, the tavern slowly returned to motion, though it was different now, quieter, more cautious, every movement carrying the weight of what had just passed between them. Elena reached for the object he had placed on the table, her fingers hovering just above it before making contact. The moment her skin brushed its surface, a faint warmth pulsed through her palm, subtle yet undeniable, like a heartbeat echoing from something ancient. She inhaled sharply, more from instinct than fear, and quickly withdrew her hand. "What is this?" she asked, her voice lower now, careful. The stranger watched her reaction closely, as if measuring it against something only he understood. "A question," he said. Elena frowned slightly, her eyes narrowing as she studied the small object again, trying to understand what it was, why it felt the way it did, why it seemed to react to her and not to anyone else in the room. Nothing about it made sense, yet something deep inside her recognized it, not in memory, but in feeling, like a forgotten echo stirring awake. "It feels," she began, then stopped, searching for the right word. "Familiar." The stranger leaned back slightly, a subtle shift, yet it changed the space between them, made it feel heavier, more intentional. "It should not," he replied. Elena lifted her gaze to meet his again, something steady returning to her expression despite the uncertainty twisting beneath it. "And yet it does." A faint sound came from the corner, one of the older rogues clearing his throat, his eyes flicking nervously between them. The tension had not gone unnoticed. Elena stepped away from the table, breaking the moment before it could deepen further, moving toward the shelves behind the counter, her hands finding small tasks to ground herself, to keep control. "You still have not eaten," she said, her tone shifting back to something practical, something safer. The stranger's lips curved faintly again, though there was less distance in it now. "I have not decided if it is safe." Elena paused, then glanced over her shoulder at him, one brow lifting slightly. "You walked into a place that shelters rogues," she said, a hint of dry humor threading through her voice. And you are worried about the food? He held her gaze, unbothered. I am careful about what I trust. The words landed differently this time, not as a challenge, as a statement. Elena turned back fully, resting her hands lightly against the counter, studying him with quiet intensity. Then why stay? The question came softer than she intended, less guarded, more honest. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked around the room, at the rogues who had begun to settle again, at the fire that flickered against the walls, at the small, fragile world she had built in a place that should not allow it. When his gaze returned to her, it carried something new. Because you do. Elena felt that more than she expected. Not the words themselves, but what lay beneath them, something unspoken yet clear. She looked away first, not out of fear, but because holding that gaze felt like stepping too close to something she was not ready to understand. Outside, the storm began to ease, the heavy rain softening into a steady rhythm against the roof. The tension in the air shifted with it, though it did not disappear. It changed, became something quieter, more dangerous in its stillness. Elena reached for the bowl she had set aside earlier and slid it toward him across the table. Eat, she said simply. This time, he did not hesitate. He picked up the spoon, his movements slow, deliberate, as if even this small act carried weight. Elena watched him for a moment, then turned away, giving him space, though her awareness of him did not fade. It sharpened. Every movement he made seemed louder in her senses, every shift of his posture, every glance, every breath. It was unsettling in a way she could not explain, or perhaps did not want to. Minutes passed. Quiet, steady. Then, without warning, the stranger spoke again, his voice cutting gently through the calm. If they come back, he said, what will you do? Elena did not turn this time. She stood still, her back to him, her gaze fixed on the flickering firelight. The answer came without hesitation. The same thing I always do. He waited. She felt it. The expectation. The weight of his attention. Slowly, she turned to face him once more, her expression calm, her voice unwavering. I will stand here. The simplicity of it made it stronger, not weaker. No dramatic declaration. No fear hidden behind bravado. Just truth. The stranger studied her again, longer this time, as if committing that answer to memory. Then, almost too quietly to notice, he nodded. Not in agreement. In acknowledgement. And though Elena did not understand why, that small gesture felt like something far more significant than anything else that had happened that night. The quiet did not last, it never did, because places like this were built on borrowed time, and Elena felt the shift before she heard it, a subtle change in the air, like something unseen drawing closer again. She was already moving before the first distant sound reached her ears, setting another log into the fire, adjusting the lanterns, small motions that kept her hands steady while her mind raced ahead. The rogues felt it too. Conversations faded. Shoulders tightened. Eyes turned toward the door without meaning to. Fear had a rhythm, and they all knew it. The stranger did not look at the door this time. He watched her. Always her. As if the answer to whatever he was searching for rested in how she reacted when the world pressed in. You sensed it, he said quietly. Not a question. Elena did not deny it. You did not, she returned, glancing at him briefly. A pause followed. Then, I did. His tone carried something new now, less detached, more grounded in the moment, as if he was no longer just observing but participating in whatever this night had become. Elena moved toward the back wall, reaching beneath the counter where a narrow wooden panel rested flush against the stone. She pressed lightly against it, and it shifted just enough to reveal the hidden space behind. A narrow passage, barely visible, enough for someone to disappear if they knew where to go. She did not announce it. She did not need to. The rogues understood immediately. One by one, quietly, they began to move, slipping toward the passage with practiced caution, their fear controlled by trust in her. The youngest hesitated, looking back at Elena with wide eyes. She gave a small nod. Go. He vanished into the dark. Within seconds, the room looked almost empty. Almost. Elena straightened, closing the panel with a soft click, her movements calm, deliberate, as if she had done this 100 times before. Maybe she had. The stranger rose slowly from his seat, his gaze following every step she took, every decision made without hesitation. You prepared for this, he said. Elena wiped her hands on a cloth, grounding herself in the motion. I survive by being ready. He studied her, something deeper settling into his expression, something closer to respect than curiosity. Outside, the sound grew clearer now. Not loud, not chaotic, controlled, measured. They were back. Elena walked to the center of the room, positioning herself between the door and everything hidden behind it. The same place she had stood before. The same choice, repeated without question. The stranger stepped closer this time, not beside her, not behind her, but near enough that she could feel his presence without turning. You could leave, he said, his voice low. You could walk away before they come in. Elena did not hesitate. So could you. A faint breath of something like amusement brushed through his expression, gone almost as quickly as it appeared. I asked first. She exhaled softly, her eyes fixed on the door, her posture steady despite the rising tension. And I answered. Storm. Yet they carried something that did not belong to an ordinary man. Elena felt it. So did the silence that followed. For a moment, everything held. Then she realized something that made her pulse shift, just slightly. He had not raised his voice. He had not threatened. And yet, the air itself had listened. Elena did not turn, but her awareness of him deepened, sharpened, as if she was standing beside something far greater than she had allowed herself to believe. The door remained closed. The night waited. And for the first time since the storm began, Elena understood that whatever happened next was no longer entirely in her control. The silence after his words did not feel empty. It felt heavy, like the world itself had paused to listen, and Elena realized with a quiet, rising certainty that the man behind her was not simply another traveler caught in the storm. The presence she had sensed before now pressed closer, no longer subtle, no longer easy to ignore, and it stirred something deep inside her chest, something ancient, something that answered without asking permission. Outside, the figures did not respond right away. No footsteps, no voices, just the soft hiss of rain against the wood and the faint creak of the tavern settling under the weight of the storm. Elena's hand remained on the door, her fingers steady despite the pulse echoing through her veins. She had faced hunters before. She had stood in this exact place, made this exact choice, more time, space between walls tightening as if drawn toward him, as if something unseen recognized him in a way nothing else did. It was not loud. It was not overwhelming. It was absolute. And if your way fails? He asked. Elena did not turn. She could not. Not yet. It will not. The latch moved again, more firmly this time. A test turning into intent. Elena exhaled slowly, then lifted it. The door opened just enough to reveal the same figures as before, though now their posture had changed. Less patient, more certain. The man at the front stepped forward, stopping just outside the threshold, rain sliding down the edges of his cloak. His eyes scanned the room, sharper now, more focused, searching for something he believed was there. We gave you a chance, he said. Elena held the door in place, not stepping aside, not yielding the space behind her. And I answered you. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. Something shifted in his expression, a flicker of irritation, quickly masked. Then you will not mind if we take a look. The words were polite. The meaning was not. Elena's grip on the door tightened, just slightly. This was the moment. The line she had drawn so many times before. The one that always came with a cost. She stepped forward, just enough to block the entrance fully, her presence small compared to theirs, yet unmovable. A mind. The air stilled. The storm softened. Even the fire behind her seemed to quiet, as if waiting. For a fraction of a second, no one moved. No one spoke. Then, behind her, the stranger exhaled softly, almost like a sigh, though there was no frustration in it. Only decision. Elena felt it before she saw it. The shift. The release. It was subtle, almost invisible, yet everything changed with it. The weight in the room deepened, not pressing down, but expanding outward, filling every corner, every space, until even the air felt different to breathe. She turned then. Slowly. For the first time since he had stepped into her tavern, she looked at him without holding anything back. And what she saw did not fit the man who had walked in from the storm. His posture had straightened, the quiet restraint in him unfolding into something far more commanding, far more certain. His eyes, once guarded, now held something brighter, sharper, something that did not belong to anyone who needed to hide. Elena's breath caught, not in fear, but in recognition she could not explain. "You said you would stand here," he reminded her, his voice calm, steady, yet carrying something deeper now, something that resonated beyond the words themselves. She nodded, barely. "I will." A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. Not amused, not mocking, approving. Then he stepped forward, closing the distance between them with quiet certainty, until he stood beside her, not behind her anymore. Not observing, standing with her. The men outside hesitated, something in their posture shifting, uncertain now, though they did not yet understand why. Elena felt it too. The change. The balance tipping in a way she had not expected. "Then you will not stand alone," he said softly. And in that moment, before any truth was spoken, before any name was given, Elena understood one thing with absolute clarity. Whatever this man was, he had not come here by accident. He had come for her. The shift was undeniable now, no longer hidden beneath quiet observation, no longer something Elena could dismiss as instinct or imagination. And as he stepped beside her, the space itself seemed to respond, as if the walls, the air, even the storm outside recognized him in a way words could not explain. The men at the door felt it too. She saw it in the slight hesitation that broke their composure, the way their eyes narrowed not at her, but at him, as if something about his presence unsettled them in ways they could not name. Elena did not move. She held her ground, her shoulders steady, her gaze fixed forward, yet every sense she had was now aware of the man standing at her side. Not behind her, not hidden, beside her, equal in the moment, though something deep within her whispered that he was anything but ordinary. "You should leave," he said again, his voice calm, almost quiet, yet carrying farther than it should have, settling into the space between them and the men outside like a boundary that had already been drawn. The man at the front let out a slow breath, studying him more carefully now, as if reassessing everything he thought he understood. "And you are?" he asked, the question measured, cautious despite the authority he tried to hold on to. The stranger did not answer right away. Instead, he took one more step forward, just enough to stand fully in the doorway, placing himself between Elena and the outside world without blocking her view. It was a small movement. It changed everything. Elena felt it in the way the tension shifted, in the way the balance tilted, in the way her own breath steadied without her realizing it. He did not introduce himself. He did not need to. Something in the way he stood, in the quiet certainty of his presence, spoke louder than any title could. "Someone who does not ask twice," he said finally. No raised voice. No threat. Just truth. The air tightened. The storm softened further, as if even the rain had begun to listen. The men exchanged a glance, subtle but telling. Doubt had entered the space, and doubt was dangerous for those who relied on control. Elena watched them closely, her awareness sharp, her instincts guiding her even as her thoughts struggled to keep up with what was unfolding. This was no longer just her stand. This had become something else entirely. "We are acting under order," the man said after a moment, his tone firm again, though the edge of uncertainty had not fully disappeared. "Then follow them somewhere else," the stranger replied. A pause. Longer this time. He did not move, did not push forward, did not demand. He simply stood there, and somehow that was enough to hold them in place. Elena felt it then, clearer than before. The weight of him. Not physical, not visible. Something deeper. Something that pressed against the world itself and expected it to yield. Her pulse slowed, not because the danger had passed, but because something within her recognized that she was no longer facing it alone. The man at the door exhaled, tension flickering across his features before he stepped back. Just slightly, just enough to break the line he had tried to hold. It was not surrender, not fully, but it was a shift. And sometimes a shift was all it took. "This is not over," he said, his voice quieter now, less certain than before. The stranger inclined his head faintly, acknowledging the words without concern. "It never is." The men lingered for a second longer, as if debating whether to press further, then turned, their forms fading into the thinning rain, their presence retreating into the night they had tried to control. Elena did not move until they were gone. Not completely. Not until the last trace of them disappeared beyond the edge of the lantern light. Only then did she exhale, a breath she had not realized she had been holding. The door remained open for a moment longer before she reached out and closed it gently, the latch settling back into place with a soft, final click. Silence followed. Not tense this time. Not fragile. Something else. Something steadier. Elena turned slowly, her gaze finding him immediately, drawn without effort, without hesitation. The questions in her eyes were clear, though she did not speak them aloud. Who are you? What are you? Why here? He met her gaze without flinching, without hiding, and for the first time since he had entered her world, there was no distance left in his expression. Only clarity. Only truth waiting at the edge of being spoken. The storm had not ended. The night had not changed. But everything else had. And Elena knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that whatever came next would not be something she could walk away from. The silence between them stretched, but it was no longer fragile. It carried weight. Something unspoken settling into place as Elena stood there, her hand still resting lightly against the door she had just closed, her eyes locked on his, as if looking away would mean missing something she could never recover. The storm outside had softened to a distant rhythm, the rain no longer pounding, just lingering, like the night itself was waiting. Waiting for him. Waiting for the truth she could feel pressing closer with every breath. They were something deeper. A recognition that whatever stood in front of her was no longer a stranger she could ignore. He did not answer immediately. Instead, he watched her, studying her the same way he had from the moment he walked through her door, but now there was no distance left in it. No disguise strong enough to hide what had already begun to surface. His presence shifted again, not growing, not expanding, but settling, as if he had stopped holding something back. Elena felt it ripple through the room, through the floor beneath her feet, through the air she drew into her lungs. It did not frighten her. It should have. It did not. Names change what people see, he said at last, his voice calm, quieter than before, yet carrying more weight than any raised tone could. And what do you see? She asked, stepping forward without realizing it, closing the small space between them, drawn by something she did not understand yet could not resist. His gaze did not waver. Someone who stands when others step aside. The answer struck deeper than she expected, not because of what it said, but because of how easily he had seen it, how clearly he had understood something she had never spoken out loud. Elena held his gaze, searching, measuring, trying to understand the man who had walked into her world and shifted it without force, without demand, without explanation. That is not enough, she answered. Something that recognizes truth. The words sent a faint chill through her, not cold, but sharp, like a realization she was not ready to face. And what truth is that? She pressed, her voice steady despite the tension building beneath it. He held her gaze, and for the first time, there was no distance left at all. No mask. No restraint. That you are not what they believe you are. The room seemed to still again, not because of fear, but because something had been spoken that could not be taken back. Elena's breath caught, just slightly, her mind racing to reject it, to dismiss it, to hold on to the version of herself she had always known. I am exactly what they believe, she said, though the certainty in her voice had softened, just enough to betray the shift within her. He stepped closer, not invading her space, not forcing anything, but near enough that she could feel the warmth of him now, the quiet power that no longer hid beneath calm observation. No, he said gently. You are what they never learned to see. The words settled deeper than anything else he had said that night. Not loud, not overwhelming, but impossible to ignore. Elena looked at him, really looked at him, and something in her shifted in response, something she had kept buried for years, something that stirred now under the weight of his certainty. And you? She asked, her voice quieter than before, almost careful now. Something. And somehow, without understanding how or why, he had found it in her. The quiet that followed his words did not feel like an ending. It felt like the edge of something just beginning. And Elena stood there, her breath slow, her thoughts shifting in ways she could no longer control, as if the truth he had placed before her had unsettled something too deep to ignore. She looked at him again, not as a stranger, not even as a threat, but as something far more complicated, something that did not fit into the world she had built for herself. You still have not answered me, she said softly, though there was less urgency in it now, more understanding, as if part of her already knew the answer she was asking for. He held her gaze, steady, unguarded, and for the first time there was no hesitation in him, no restraint left to hold back what had already been revealed in every unspoken way. "No," he said quietly. "I have not." The words were simple, but they carried weight, finality, like a door closing behind them. Elena stepped closer, just enough to feel the space between them shift again, not from tension this time, but from something quieter, something that drew her forward instead of warning her away. "Then tell me," she said, her voice calm, unwavering now. "Not as a stranger, not as a question, just tell me the truth." For a moment, he said nothing. The fire flickered behind her, casting soft light across his features, revealing the sharp lines of his face, the stillness in his posture, the quiet strength that no longer hid itself. Then, slowly, he reached up and removed the last trace of disguise he had carried, not a mask she could see, but something deeper, something in the way he held himself, the way he allowed his presence to settle fully into the room without restraint. It was subtle. It changed everything. Elena felt it like a shift in gravity, like the world had tilted just slightly to align around him. Her breath caught, not from fear, but from recognition that had no explanation. "My name," he said, his voice low, steady, undeniable, "is Lucian Blackthorn." The name settled into the air between them, heavy, impossible to ignore, and Elena felt it before her mind could process it, the weight of it, the meaning behind it, the truth that came with it. Her pulse faltered for a single second, then steadied. She did not step back. She did not look away. "The Alpha King," she said, not as a question, but as a realization finally spoken aloud. He inclined his head slightly, acknowledging it without pride, without arrogance, simply as fact. Silence followed, but it was not empty. It was full of everything that had led to this moment, every choice, every word, every look that now made sense in a way it had not before. Elena exhaled slowly, her thoughts racing, trying to catch up, trying to understand how the man who had stood beside her, who had watched her, who had chosen to stay, could also be the one who ruled the very world that had cast people like her aside. "You came here to watch me," she said, her voice quieter now, not accusing, not afraid, just searching. Lucian did not deny it. "I came to see what kind of person would defy everything without asking for anything in return." Elena absorbed that, letting it settle, letting it reshape the way she saw him, the way she saw this night, the way she saw herself. "And," she asked, lifting her gaze to meet his again, steady despite everything that had changed. He stepped closer, not with force, not with command, but with quiet certainty, until the space between them held nothing but truth. "And I found someone worth more than every rule I was taught to follow." The words were not loud. They did not need to be. They carried enough weight on their own. Elena felt them, not just in her mind, but deeper, in a place she had never allowed herself to examine too closely. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The night had stilled completely now, the storm gone, the silence outside matching the one that held them in place. Then, slowly, Elena glanced toward the hidden wall, toward the rogue she had protected, toward the life she had built in the shadows. "If they find out who you are," she said quietly, "everything changes." Lucian followed her gaze, then returned it to her, his expression calm, certain in a way that did not leave room for doubt. "It already has." Elena looked back at him, really looked, and for the first time she did not see a stranger, or even a king. She saw someone who had made a choice, just like she had. The difference was, his choice could change everything. "What happens now?" she asked, the question soft, but carrying the weight of everything that stood between them. Lucian held her gaze, his answer steady, unshaken. "Now," he said, "we stop pretending that the world cannot be different." The words lingered, not as a promise, not as a command, but as something far more powerful. A beginning. And as Elena stood there, facing the man who could reshape everything she had ever known, she realized that for the first time in her life, she was not standing alone at the edge of change.